Now, I said I'm happy that Helen is here. Her party is the second largest party in the country, and it is not a nationalist party. However, the question that now that the voters have rejected the National Party, they have rejected the ANC, we're left with one party. That is a serious party. We have a multiplicity of unserious parties, but we are left with one serious party in the country, which is the Democratic Alliance. But now, what is the Democratic Alliance going to do to get the 51% of the votes that it needs to run the government of the country? Because today, the DA is being used to perpetuate the ANC. I'm not saying it shouldn't be in the government of national unity, but one of the effects, there are lots of positives about the DA being in the government of national unity, but there are also negatives. And one of the negatives is that it perpetuates the ANC to stay in power and to continue destabilizing the economy of the country with its policies. So what I would like to see come out of this conference is what is the plan of action to get the second largest party, which is not a nationalist party, to get to 51% of the vote. But we need a program of action, and we need more about what we who are here in this room, what are we being asked to do? Not what are we talking about, what's going wrong, but what are we being asked to do? So at least we have, I don't know how many other leaders of other political parties are here besides the DA, but I think we need those political leaders who are here to also come and tell us what do they think should be done to, instead of continuing to keep the ANC involved in power, it should go to the opposition benches. Now, what is wrong with nationalism? I've tried to explain what's wrong with nationalism. But nationalism is very powerful. We are seeing it in the United States today with the Republican Party. Nationalism is a very powerful emotion. Nationalism drove the Nazis to power. That was the horse that the Nazis rode on its back to get to power. And genocide and huge destruction. So it's not a small matter that nationalism in South Africa is being rejected by the voters. We have to thank the voters before nationalism in South Africa morphs and changes and becomes like the xenophobic nationalism and the driver of hatred that it is becoming in the United States and that it became in Germany in the 1930s. The grievance within nationalism is a very powerful emotion, and this has to be fought against and it has to be overcome. The culture of grievance in South Africa has been entrenched during the last 100 years amongst the Afrikaans population and amongst the African population. And this culture has to be addressed. And it has to be addressed practically. It's not just talked about, but we have to address the culture of grievance in this country. And it goes, as I said, with the culture of entitlement that we see in South Africa. Now, what form does entitlement take in the South Africa of today in the ANC? It takes the form of affirmative action. What affirmative action does in South Africa is been so destructive of our economy. Today, the South African civil service, which is essentially an African civil service, other than a few specialized professionals like in health, for example, but it is predominantly, certainly at the middle to the upper echelons of its management, is manned by the African middle class. The South African public service, according to the latest study by the International Monetary Fund, 2 years ago, the International Monetary Fund was asked, interestingly, by the South African government to study the civil service, the public service. And what the IMF found was that the South African public service is the highest paid in the world. 16% of South African gross domestic product goes to the salaries of the public service in this country. Similar countries to South Africa at similar level of development, such as Thailand in Asia, Chile in South America, only 6% of GDP goes to the public, to pay the public service. So we ask ourselves, why is our economy not growing? The reason our economy is not growing is because the profits from the private sector are being siphoned off through the tax system and paid out as salaries for consumption to the public service. When our economy was growing in the early 2000s, investment as a percentage of GDP was 25%, between 23 and 25% of GDP. Today, investment is only 15% of GDP in South Africa. Why? Because if we took that 10%, that 10% of GDP, which is being eaten up by the public service salaries, and put it back into investment sector in the economy, we would have 25% of investment as a percentage of GDP, which means our economy would be job creating, it would be reducing our unemployment and the levels of poverty and the levels of social welfare that we are sitting within the economy. So the first action that has to be implemented, and I'm glad that during the last failed budget presentation, the leader of the DA pointed out this matter, pointed out that there is an inflated and a bloated public service expenditure in the country.